Hi, this is Monica Paolini from Senza Fili, and today we're talking about wireless connectivity in airports. Well, airports are on the brink of a transformation. The transformation towards automation, increased operational efficiency, more efficient services for both passengers and tenants. All of this is driven by the need to have better cost efficiency, and by competition, and also by requirements for reliability and security. And in all this, private networks have a big role to play. And today I'm talking to Johan Bjorklund, the CEO at Betacom, about how their 5G as a service approach makes it possible for airports to have their own CBRS private networks without having to deploy or operate one of their own, and yet retain full control over them. So, Johan, thanks for being with us today. Now, Johan, Betacom has been in wireless for a long time. Can you tell us what's special about what you do?
Thank you very much, Monica. Very nice to be here. Well, Betacom has been around for 30 years. We've done mostly construction projects within wireless. Within the scope of what we've done, we've actually worked with a lot of airports. So we built out wireless infrastructure in several airports across our history. Last 6 months, we ventured into something called 5G as a service, which is we're offering enterprises, including airports, a wireless network using private wireless CBRS spectrum. And we're basically enabling airports to take advantage of 5G services or 4G for that matter, but on private spectrum and using their private network within their own firewalls. And why we ventured into airports are it's actually kind of like a small city. They have so many different applications within an airport, and those applications, they need a robust, secure network to be able to run properly. Today, most of them are using Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi comes with a lot of challenges. There's often quite a bit of congestions on them. There's also mobility aspect. Wi-Fi wasn't really built for mobility to begin with. And with private wireless, we can address a lot of these challenges, basically make their applications run a lot smoother.
You're right. From a technology point of view, airports are the perfect showcase environment, because there you find any kind of challenge for wireless deployments and the need to support almost any use case you can think of. At the same time, an airport might want to deploy one or more wireless networks, but they might not want to do it themselves. They might not have the capability to do so in-house, and they might not want to hire people to run their networks. So having to run their own networks might discourage airports from deploying them. So having someone who can do it for them can be crucially valuable to the airport, and also can accelerate the adoption of private networks in airports. Now, we've recently seen a sudden growth in the interest from airports to test and deploy private wireless networks. Now, what is driving the change? Why now?
So what we do is we design and we build and we operate private wireless networks for airports and for other enterprises as well. So we do everything in-house, and we're doing all of this without our customers don't have to be experts at this. They don't have to be experts at 4G or 5G. We're the experts. So they don't need to add one single headcount in order to get their own private wireless network. So we basically do everything soup to nuts turnkey for our customers to make it very easy for them.
How does the recent work you're doing in airports fit with Betacom activities? What makes airport one of the best environments to prove the viability of wireless technologies?
I think there are several reasons for this, right? But one reason is, if you think about the whole travel industry and the airports, what happened with COVID, it went from being very, very busy to everything just shutting down more or less overnight. And then slowly, but quite fast, actually started picking back up again. And what happened in this period of time was that a lot of people, a lot of companies, a lot of airports, as well as a lot of airlines, they restructured. So they had to get rid of people, and airlines and airports did it differently, right? So nobody did it exactly the same. But now, as travelers start picking back up again, there's a lot of areas are underdimensioned. So there's a huge need for automation. And automation goes for above the wing services as well as below the wing services. So like baggage handling, baggage tracking, package tracking, and so forth, but as well as boarding an aircraft. With the challenges in the labor market right now, trying to hire new people, train them, and so forth, to take care of this onslaught of demand, after the COVID shutdowns, there's just a big need for automation. And what you need to really effectively automate these processes, at the end of the day, you need to connect everything wirelessly. And when you start connecting everything wirelessly, at the end of the day, you need a very robust network. And one of the challenges that we're seeing airports are struggling with is the capacity of Wi-Fi and the nature of Wi-Fi, where if you think about an airport, you may have, we were at one airport, for example, a couple of weeks ago, and Wi-Fi was working just fine. But then there was a large aircraft, I think it was a Boeing, I think it was a 747, it was an older one, but it came in from Japan. And you could just really almost see the network just went down because everybody on that that flight just powered up their phones at the same time, and they all logged into Wi-Fi. So now you have business critical applications that you rely on, being an airport, that all of a sudden don't have enough capacity anymore. So the ability to have separate networks where you run these business critical applications on, I think is something that has just been more attention now from the airports on, because of the situation here with COVID and the situation of demand increasing, but then not necessarily have the right staffing in place.
So, and when passengers all get to check their phones after they land, it's also a peak time of activity for the airport. And this is also when the luggage comes in. So the increase in traffic among passengers and for airports is correlated. But wouldn't it be sufficient, and presumably also cheaper and less complex, to expand the Wi-Fi network rather than building a private network using CBRS or other licensed spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily easy to do because at the end of the day, you only have a couple of different spectrums that you can run Wi-Fi on. So you can always add another Wi-Fi network, but at the end of the day, you're competing for the same resources, the spectrum, which is the common resource, right? So if you're adding too many Wi-Fi networks in the same spectrum, it really doesn't matter, even if you partitioned out Wi-Fi and you're using the same spectrum, and then all of a sudden you have, all these passengers coming in and they're firing up their phones at the same time. They're competing now for the same spectrum, even though it's a different Wi-Fi network. So there are a lot of challenges with optimizing Wi-Fi networks, and an airport is so dynamic because you have so many people coming and going, especially through the bigger airports, right? And for hours and hours of each day, in this specific airport that I visited not very long ago, they have applications that just don't work because of capacity reasons, and it's just not acceptable. And to your point, it's usually when the people come in, right? When the big aircrafts come in, and that's when they need the applications to work the most. So there's a real need to address this challenge.
To meet the challenge, airports need to have more than a Wi-Fi network, but can they afford it? Can they shoulder the initial deployment cost? And is there a good business case there?
The business case is actually not, private wireless, the way we're pricing it, is not that much more expensive compared to Wi-Fi. And we also got to bear in mind that the way Betacom is offering our services is really turnkey. So we don't need to add training, we don't need to add staff and so forth, right? So that it's pretty easy for the IT organization of the airports to add a private wireless network if they use 5G service from Betacom, because we're doing everything end to end. So from price perspective, it's actually quite competitive. It's a little bit more expensive than Wi-Fi, but it's not that much more expensive.
So what are then the overall cost savings and revenue opportunities for an airport to deploy a wireless private network?
I think there's both cost savings and revenue opportunities, but I think one is, give you a very real example, right, at an airport. There's a biometric scanning system, for example, that they have passengers come in when they board their aircraft. And if it's biometrics, you don't need as many agents there, as many gate agents. The problem in this case is after about 16 to 17 scans, the scanner has taken up so much resources from Wi-Fi that Wi-Fi basically shuts down. And then what happens, because of the way the system is configured, it needs to restart. And the restart, for whatever reason, I haven't talked to the designer about this, but the restart apparently takes 30 minutes. So if you can only scan 16, 17 people to go, to board an aircraft, then you have to restart it. Then you have to fall back to the old system, right, where you need as many gate agents again. Obviously, there's no savings there whatsoever. However, if you could have a wireless network that would actually work 100% of the time or close to, then you don't need as many gate agents. You may need 1 versus 3 when you do this automated boarding process. And you don't need to fall back to the old system. And in fact, it's probably so bad with this situation right now. When you have this new modern biometric scanning system, you actually need 1 person that takes care of that and restarts that all the time as well. So you actually added a gate agent, which is quite counterproductive. So there's definitely savings to be done, but at the end of the day, it's just not cost savings. It's also how fast you can run your processes. So at the end of the day, it's about turnaround time for planes at the gate. I think that's a real cost savings versus just bodies at the gate agents, that is.
In an airport, the value of getting things done on time is huge. Now, if a plane departs late, there might be a domino effect on other flights as well. So let's consider the use cases then. It's not just that the airport that can benefit from a wireless network, and it's also the airlines and all the other tenants that can benefit from it too. Now, what role does CBRS play in making a private network much easier and more compelling for an airport and the other enterprises to have a private network? So with CBRS, airports as well as other enterprises have a mid-band spectrum that they can use without having to pay for a license or even applying for it, right?
Yeah, CBRS is public spectrum dedicated by the FCC in the mid 3.5 gigahertz band, which is ideal, really. It's what we call mid-band. And with the FCC opening up that spectrum, that allows enterprises such as airports to basically have their own networks without having to actually own their own spectrum, because it's public spectrum. And then there are arbitrators that are ensuring that there's always 20 megahertz of spectrum, which is quite a bit, available for the airport. So even though the airport doesn't own its own spectrum, it's actually guaranteed that 20 megahertz. So they're not going to suffer performance issues by not owning their own spectrum. And this has basically allowed for airports and other enterprises to get in and own their own private wireless networks in a way that they couldn't do before.
With CBRS, airports have access to unlicensed but protected spectrum. Now, with Wi-Fi, anybody can plug in an AP, tenants, but also passengers. This is not something that can happen with CBRS, and that's an important difference, because for CBRS, you need to be granted use by a SAS. Now, what is that you hear from airports on CBRS? Are they on board with it?
So business critical applications for airports are, for example, luggage tracking. Right now, luggage gets tracked when you checked in, and it also gets tracked when it gets checked in on an aircraft. And you have many of the carriers have applications you can actually see on your phone that your luggage now be stored on the aircraft. But what happens there in between, which actual, those little trucks that run outside of the aircrafts there, which one of those trucks your luggage is actually on. That's not being tracked right now. So there are IoT applications that you can run where you can make that tracking continuous, and for that you need a wireless network that is available and up basically all the time. That's one business critical application. Another business critical application would be, for example, a boarding application where you automate the boarding application, like we talked about before. Another one would be credit card machines, for example, at the point of sale. Some of those are running on Wi-Fi right now as well, and those are also business critical, and you cannot have any glitches in those. And those are the type of applications that we see that airports would like to port over to a private wireless network.
CBRS is good also because you can get outdoor coverage and mobility support, and those are more difficult with Wi-Fi. But at an airport, might ask, why does it need to build its own private network? Could it just contract with a mobile operator and that already has a network and use that? The airport would have to pay to use for this network, but it would not have to build its own.
Absolutely, you can. That's definitely a way to go as well. What you're going to find though probably is that some of the business applications that airports would like to run, they don't necessarily know how much bandwidth that they will consume, and there are so many different price plans there, so that the cost could be quite unpredictable depending on what kind of applications they would like to run. They may know exactly what they're running today, but tomorrow they may want to change that. So those networks will always be there, of course. But carriers, as you know, the mobile network operators, they also, all of their customers are also going through airports, right? So they have all the smartphones, et cetera, et cetera. So there's of course a limitation in resources there as well, where I think there's a healthy sort of tug of war of resources there for their consumers versus an airport's business application. You know, where does a carrier really want to add and prioritize resources? Ideally, we'd like to do both, but it also, of course, depends on the type of applications that airports put on. If it's too bandwidth intense, for example, surveillance monitors and so forth, that would suck out a lot of resources, and that can be quite expensive.
And having control over your networks is always an advantage. What do you recommend to airports that want to have a CBRS private networks? Should they go for LTE or should they go for 5G?
Right now, it really depends on the end user devices. So a lot of the end user devices are not available at this point in time for 5G. So most of it is 4G. Now, the good news, though, is that what you really get with 5G more than anything else is really low latency. But LTE latency, 4G latency, especially when you have everything on-prem, including your core network on-premise, latency is really quite low. So for the most part, those applications that airports would like to run, we don't really see latency being a big issue there. So there, for almost all applications, 4G is okay right now. However, once they get used to the capabilities of 5G, there's going to be a lot of innovation, I believe, with more applications requiring 5G type of services, both with speed as well as with latency. And as that happens, there's going to be more and more demand for 5G, and we see the ecosystem for devices catching up at some point in time here within the next year or so, also for 5G. And then we're going to see more 5G networks versus 4G networks on CBRS as well.
An airport can gradually transition to their CBRS networks for 4G or 5G when it's time for them. And that might take some time for devices, not only to support 5G, but also to reach 4G level price points, so they will be more affordable. Now, how can an airport get some revenues from giving access to its CBRS network or applications that are running on it to airlines, retailers, other tenants?
It's so they have to work careful. They have to work really closely, especially with their biggest customers, right? In this case, it's usually the airlines, and we get the SIM card for the airports, and those SIM cards then can be distributed to their partners, right? Like airlines and their tenants and so forth as well, right? So it's actually pretty easy for them to allow access on their own network. And at the end of the day, though, the network is owned by the airport, and they control who gets on that network, and it's controlled by that SIM at the end of the day, who gets on the network and who doesn't. And if you don't have a SIM, you're not going to get on the network, which is why they can guarantee the applications that are actually running on the network, and therefore they have a better control of what the actual performance for the applications will look like.
So, in closing, what do you see coming up next?
We're actually working with several airports across the country right now, and actually several airlines as well. So what we've seen is that the gates are sometimes owned by the airlines and sometimes owned by the airport. So and that poses a problem, because is it the airline's responsibility or the airport's responsibility? And for different airports, it's different. So so that's why we're working very closely with both the airlines as well as the airports to basically roll this solution out to as many airports and airlines as we possibly can in the country. And we're working with quite a few of them right now to evaluate the technology and evaluate the kind of applications that they would like to put on to this private wireless network. But so far, it's looking very promising. There's a lot of interest out there for us, and we're keeping extremely busy.
Johan, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us. It's been a very interesting conversation on how wireless and private networks specifically can help airports to have the connectivity that they need.
Thank you very much, Monica.
And I would like to remind you that this is part of a deep dive report from Senza Fili on wireless connectivity on airports that you can read, and that has the transcript of this conversation as well. Thank you all for listening.